first before we get too far.
Okay.
Can everybody hear and see? Let us know in the chat.
Okay. Can you hear me? Here we go. We are ready to rock and roll. We have got
good then. All right.
We've got a presentation. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and go. Are you ready, Sir Fletcher?
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right. So tonight's discussion, we're going to talk about breaking into the business. And to do so, I need to really sort of lay out some groundwork of how the business works. Now, when I say breaking into the business, I'm talking about Hollywood business. There are a lot of options that can happen locally. There are a lot of options that, you know, within your own local film economy, and those are going to be quite a bit different than this. This is really, our discussion tonight is all about Hollywood and how it works, and to give some tips on how to break in. So, and I call it really the game of Hollywood, because it's kind of a game, essentially, that you really got to play if you want to get in, and you kind of got to know how it works. So my goal tonight is to give you an overview of how the whole system works, who the different players are, and how they integrate, and then how we really sort of how we can break in at the levels coming out of high school or college. So let's go ahead and kick it off. In Hollywood, there are three separate players. You've got producers, agents, and studios. Those are the three elements that really come to play when you're talking about Hollywood. It's those three groups, and each of those groups have individuals that are in those groups that are essentially running them. So I'm going to jump into the studios first, talk a little bit about the studios. With the studios, there are majors and mini majors. The majors are just that, major film studios. So you've got DreamWorks, Walt Disney, Paramount, Columbia, Warner Brothers, Universal. Those are the majors. And then you have mini majors that sort of, every major probably has a mini major. Like 20th Century Fox has Fox Searchlight, and Paramount has Paramount Vantage. I'm not sure if they're around still or not, but it's really like that. Fox Faith, a lot of them have a faith based mini major. Universal's is the major, the mini major is Focus. And so the division of those two are that the majors will essentially produce the major films, the high budget films. The mini majors are the ones that take on the lesser budget films, but they all have people that run them, obviously. So and then you have producers. Producers are production companies, and usually have a producer at the helm. Like you've got Jerry Mullen, and then films that he produces. You've got Brian Grazer and Ron Howard at Imagine Entertainment, and the films they produce. Well, there are hundreds, if not thousands. There are a lot of producers out there. Okay, and they're all producing different movies, and we'll get into that just a little bit more. So then the third element are the agencies. I've listed 4 major agencies, which have Creative Artist Agency, UTA, ICM, and then William Morrison Endeavor. They just, not just, a year or two ago merged, and so it's William Morris Endeavor. So those are the 4 major agencies. So you've got those 3 elements that pretty much run Hollywood. So they all have leverage. They all have different aspects of leverage. So we're going to talk a little bit about the leverage that each of them have, so that we can then kind of understand how how they all come together and combine and rely on each other for their pieces of the puzzle of this game, what I like to call it. So producers have essentially the creativity, right? They've got the concepts, the creative concepts and the ideas, and then creativity. They're the ones that usually drive the creativity. They're the ones that foster it. They're the ones that develop a project and to do the kind of get the projects going. The studios, they are the money. They're the banks. And the agents represent the talent, which are actors, directors, and writers. And so these three come together really as the Hollywood player, and they all sort of cross over one another. So each of them have their area of influence, and they work together in making of major motion pictures or mini major motion pictures or independents. So we didn't even list the independents, but there's a bunch of independents out there too. So continuing here, kind of setting it up. So you've got with the studio system. So now we got the studios, and I want to talk a little bit about the studios and how they work and how they start to interact with the other elements. So we talked about the studios, and we've got producers. So the way that happens is every studio has a producer or many producers, as you'll see here in a second. So Disney used to have since fired them, but just for this example, Disney used to have a producer deal with Jerry Bruckheimer, or Jerry Bruckheimer had a studio deal. And so what that means is Disney would pay Jerry Bruckheimer's overhead to get to look at his films first, because Jerry Bruckheimer has produced a lot of big films, made a lot of money, and made a lot of money for Disney, for that matter. So every studio has a whole bunch of producers. So if you recall, when we were talking about the studios, the majors and the mini majors, they all have producing deals, studio deals, or producing deals with producers. And so I'm just showing you here Disney as one example, and they have several producer deals. Well, DreamWorks has the same thing. Fox has the same thing. And Paramount has the same thing. They all have the same. So now the agencies, essentially, those are the four agencies I talked about before. These four agencies cater to the studios and the producers. And so the way they do that, the way they interact is by reaching out to the different producers for the different needs that they have. If you recall, let's see here. I just want to go back just for a second, maybe. If you recall, the agents, their leverage is actors and their leverage. And so when you system, that act with these elements in the system. So an agency, writers or actors or directors, they will be producers and be aware of, for instance, CAA in this example, aware that Jerry Bruckheimer has a project, because remember, he's the creative element. He has a project that needs, the agent is reaching out to writers. So Darren Fletcher, the famous writer, and CAA.
I made it.
You made it. CAA is Darren Fletcher over to Jerry Bruckheimer to get that job to be the writer on the project Jerry is producing. Why? Because they want Jerry Bruckheimer to hire Darren Fletcher because Darren Fletcher is paid a lot of money, right, Darren? Darren Fletcher's paid a lot of money to write, and guess what? Agents get 10% of that. So it's their job to be pushing Darren Fletcher or whatever writers to Jerry Bruckheimer or all these other creative forces that are pushing projects and creative and have attached them to studios. Okay, so it might be a director, it might be an actor, it might be, those are above the line. It could be even a production designer, but we won't go into that. That really kind of complicates the map here a little bit. So that's what happens. Producers are producing projects because they are the creative force. They get them attached to studios, and then those specific projects have needs to have writers or directors. Now, we would like to be, if we're in high school or we're in college, we would like for our students or us as students to get jobs in Hollywood. If I claim that I'm a director, then I want to figure out how to get in and be a director. If I'm a writer, I want to figure out how to get in. If I want to be a producer, how do I get into this system? Okay, so now we understand what the system is. That's how the studio system works. And now let's sort of take the producer track and we'll talk a little bit how all of this sort of comes together. Okay, so the producer's track, really, all of them rely around building relationships with the players. Okay, so if there's one thing that I stress with young filmmakers, whether they're young writers or young producers or young directors, is to establish your network. Okay, so you got to build relationships with the players. Who are the players? The players are the producers, the studio, the producers, and the agents. You gotta establish your relationships with them, and then you within that network of players, you got to establish your network. You got to build relationships with the players, and you got to establish the network. So how do we do that, right? So we've got our goal is to get a network within this world that has all the power. So what are the jobs? Okay, the jobs within each of these are producers. There's producers. There's executives, like there's senior VPs of creative. There's junior execs, and then there are assistants that really sort of cater to those junior execs, and producers, right? On the agency side, there are agents, there are junior agents, there are assistants that service the junior agents and the agents, and there's the mailroom that brings the mail around to everyone, right? Now, then there's the studios, the studio heads. You've got the studio heads, the presidents, the executives, the junior executives, and the assistants, right? So, which are the most important in this whole formula for what we're talking about today? It is, oh wait, hang on, let me show you one more thing before we get into that. So I just wanted to add this here so you can kind of see that the agents represent talent, actors, writers, and directors, right? Okay, so if you're an actor, writer, director, this is kind of where you're going to fall into this formula. We're talking producers though right now, the path for producers. So producers, where is the place where you will land? Okay, I'm coming out of college and I'm on the producer track, so I want to be a producer. So I'm going to go to Jerry Bruckheimer, and I'm going to tell Jerry Bruckheimer that I am a producer out of college. That's what I want to do, and I want to co-produce with him. Fletch, is that a great idea? It's no. Not, because is Jerry Bruckheimer going to partner with me just coming out of college?
Who?
Yeah, exactly. There's no reason for him to partner with me. Okay? So the most important positions in this whole network here are these guys at the bottom of the rung, right? The mailroom. the assistants to the producers and the execs, the junior execs, and the assistants to the junior execs. Those are the ones that are important, at least for us right now, because our goal is to build relationships with the players. How do we do that? We do that through establishing our network. And so we got to figure out how to get into these positions, right? Because that gets us involved with this network. Because the way it works, we talked about a little bit back with that other graphic, but the agents are always pushing, content, writers, directors, to producers, and to the studios. Okay, and then the studios and the producers are pushing, looking to casting directors. I kind of added that one in there for you guys. That's another one. It's not, I wouldn't consider it one of the players, but it's an element that's playing into it, because actors kind of get pushed to casting directors. But with writers and directors, it's going back and forth to the producers and the studios. So the producers may request from the agents, we're looking for writers, right? So that's how this whole thing is kind of moves. Okay, so back to this image. So we have Jerry Bruckheimer representing this one producer deal. Okay, now there's another producer deal here, which is Brigham Taylor. He's another producer. Brigham Taylor was the, I guess he wasn't on the producing end. He was on the studio end when he did the Pirates of the Caribbean. But now he's a producer for Disney. And in his recent credits, Fletch, what was his recent credits? His recent credits, Christopher Robin. I can't hear you, Fletch, if you're talking to me. So it's Christopher Robin was his most recent. He's working on others for the studio. So each one of these little bubbles, as I mentioned, represents a producer, one of the many producers that we talked about in the beginning. Okay, remember this list here? So these producers are all attached to, we're talking about one studio right now. One studio. Okay, so one studio has got, I don't know, they may have 10 to 20 producer deals, depending on how big the studio is. If it's a mini major, then they might have less. But each of those producers and each of those agents and each of those studios have assistants, right? So we talked about assistants. So each of those have assistants that are working and helping to get the work done, right? So everyone in the studio, there's executives at all the studios levels, they all have assistants. All the producers have assistants. All the agents have assistants. And so that is the level that we want to be coming in at as we're coming out of college. We want to come in and be assistants. Now, why in the world do we want to come in and be assistants? Really, because we can't. If you want to play in this big world, then you got to start at the bottom. If we're playing in our local industry, then it's a little different, because we can come in as a director and we can direct smaller commercials. We can do things like that. Wedding videos, we can come in at a bit of a higher level. But if we're trying to get into the studio system, it's the best part is the fastest way to go, or the fastest way to getting a job, is coming in at the bottom level. So if you're coming in as on the agency route, okay, and you want to be in the agents, become an agent, then you start in the mailroom. If you want to go and work at DreamWorks or Disney or any of the major studios, then you become an assistant somewhere or in their mailroom. And then producers, it's a little easier to get in with producers because they have a minimal budgets, and so they take on free work and that sort of thing, and you can come in as a an assistant to an exec over at a production company. So if our goal is to network, if you remember, let me come back to this image here. So it's all about networking. And so if I am an assistant right here on Jerry Bruckheimer's desk, then my goal is to create a network. Now, Fletch, should I be trying to become networked with the top agent at CAA if I'm an assistant on Jerry Bruckheimer's desk?
They'll never listen to you.
They'll never listen to me.
No.
So I want to become friends with the assistant that's on, the big agent over at CAA's desk. Because if I can create a network and I know that assistant over there, and I know an assistant over here at ICM, and I know an assistant over here at Endeavor, at William Morris Endeavor, and maybe I know an assistant over at Brigham Taylor's company, I start to build my network of other assistants. And so as I start to build these network of other assistants, my whole goal, if, for instance, I'm working on Jerry Bruckheimer's desk, and it's my job to find content, right? If we remember what producers provide, where did I have that? Producers provide, sorry, here it is. Producers provide creative information. So projects. I as an assistant, am I going to be networking with other assistants over at the agency level who represent writers to know when that writer is going to take out his next script to the studio system. If I, an assistant, can know when Jim Hertzfeld, for instance, who wrote Meet the Parents, when he's coming out with his next big screenplay, if I'm networked in there with that assistant that the agent that represents Jim Hertzfeld, if I know that assistant, I will be on the inside flow of information that Jim Hertzfeld, a writer, is coming out with his next big hit, and I'll be talking to that assistant. Hey, when is your boss? Hold on, watch. Let me get this right. Oh, hey, when is your boss? See, I'm on the phone because that's what you do. You spend all your time on the phone. I'm talking to the assistant over in the agent that represents Jim Hertzfeld, and I'm saying, hey, when's Jim coming out with his next screenplay? And he says, well, don't tell anybody. Okay, I won't tell anybody.
Yeah, right.
That he's coming out with it next week. And I say, hey, assistant friend of mine that you're in my network, and I've been spending lots of time with you on the phone, and you like me. We even went to dinner one night. So I built that relationship. And I say, hey, do you mind slipping it to me a day early? Because I want to read it before anyone else in town reads it, because I want to get it to my boss so that he can buy it. He's a big fan of Jim Hertzfeld. If you recall, my boss produced Meet the Parents. So Jim likes my boss. And Steven Spielberg loves Jim Hertzfeld. So I'm the best office to send that creative piece of material because I have an in. Does that make sense? So thank you for sending me that screenplay. Okay, so back to our formula here. So I have, get me back to the producer track here. All of these assistants at various studios, various agencies, various production companies start to become my network. So and this is the one thing that I can't stress more. If I'm an assistant and I am on, I don't know, maybe even a no-name producer, but I'm kind of in the system. My boss is kind of a no-name producer, but I have a network of other assistants all over town. Guess what? those assistants eventually will get promoted.
And it's usually pretty fast. The turnover rate's pretty high.
Turnover rate's pretty high. So you always, whenever you're talking to other assistants, man, you got to give, I don't care if they're at some podunk production company, you treat them like they're going to be the next Jerry Bruckheimer, because they very well might become the very next Jerry Bruckheimer. And guess what? If you're an assistant still, because you're a little bit slower in making that jump to, executive or whatever, if your buddy just becomes Jerry Bruckheimer, guess what? He might be hiring junior executives, and or you just know the next Jerry Bruckheimer, and so your network starts to rise. Now, here's the mistake that a lot of students make when they come into business, and I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but a lot of people will come out of college and try to go and network. Like, okay, I love Ron Howard movies, love them. I want to work for Ron Howard. So they pick up the phone and they try. Yeah, I'm going to pick up the phone again. Hello. Hi. Is this Ron Howard's office? Yes, this is the assistant to Ron Howard. Hi, assistant. You're not that important to me. I would like to talk to Ron Howard because I'm out of the business. I have no credits, nothing, but I am important. Hey!
And they just hang up on you.
They hang up on you, right? So your goal isn't to meet Ron Howard. Your goal should be to get to know the assistant to Ron Howard, or anyone lower than that. I don't know, the mail guy. You're probably not talking to the mail guy on the phone. But so a lot of kids will come out of high school or out of college and trying to build those relationships at a level it's just not reality. And, they may bump into Ron Howard at some function and talk to him and think, I made it, I got it, I talked to him. He's not going to remember you the next day. He's not going to know who you are. He's not going to remember your name because you have no value in this whole formula of everything that's moving around, right? You don't have any value in the clout within the Hollywood leverage. You don't have leverage. And so if you don't have leverage for Ron Howard has no reason to continue to build that network with you because you don't really offer anything. But if you're talking to Ron Howard's assistant and that assistant is overworked, and you find out he's looking for interns, free interns, and you've called him a few times and whatever, and you say, hey, I'm graduating from Chapman University. I was going to say USC, but I'd like to pick something else. Or I'm graduating from Oklahoma University, and I'm looking for internships, and I'll work for free. And that assistant is overworked, probably underpaid, and needs help, and he's more than happy to have you come in as an intern and be an intern. And then when that assistant gets promoted to be a junior exec with Ron Howard, guess where you're sitting and guess what line you're in to get that assistant job in Ron Howard's office. You're next in line because you're the assistant. There might be you're the intern. There might be other assistants or other people outside of that whole bubble, but you're on the inside, and you're the next one to be plucked out to be an assistant, even though you're an intern and you want to become a producer, but you're climbing that ladder. And so that's really the most common mistake I see as young filmmakers are coming out of college. It's not bad to set your sights high. I think you want to know where you want to get to, but then start at the bottom, right? Okay, so let's go back. So that kind of gives you an overview of a producer, like being a producer breaking into the business. Now, I'm trying to race through. I didn't do too bad on that one, Fletch. That was 30 minutes, and I cranked through it. Okay, so now let's talk about writers. So you know the system already. You already know who the players are. You know the leverage points, and you know there's producers, agents, and studios. So now let's talk about it from the perspective of writers. Okay, so where are the writers represented? Do we all remember? By which of the game, the Hollywood leveraged trifecta? It's the agents, right? So the agents are the ones that represent writers and directors and actors. So that's our target, right? If I'm a writer and I want to get into an agent, that's my path. And I want to get an agent to represent me as a writer and take my screenplays and schlep my screenplays into the system to Jerry Bruckheimer. Okay? So here's the bad news. There's probably 100,000 non-working writers out there. So you are one of 100,000.
Hey, just be thankful you're not an actor.
Yeah, actors are probably 1 in a million. That's where the phrase probably comes from. You are 1 in a million. But so how in the world, if we are a writer and we're writing our screenplays, we wrote 2 at college while we were taking our college courses, how in the world do we get above the fray of 100,000 hungry writers trying to get out there and get their screenplays seen? It's almost impossible. But writers,
and remember, I think it's important to point out, you're not talking like you're writing against people who don't know what they're doing. At this level, these 100,000 writers are pretty decent.
Oh,
the closer you get to the top, they get really good.
They get really good. So your goal is that you got to get above the fray. Somehow you got to get noticed. Somehow someone's got to read your screenplay and say, "Oh my goodness, that's awesome." So guess what we're going to do? We're coming out of college. We're going to print off 50,000 copies of the script, and we're going to send it to every agent in the book, right?
No.
That's not it. That's not how you do it. They're not going to pay attention. Your screenplay is going to get tossed in the trash. I was looking for a screenplay, and I was going to dramatically toss it in the trash, but I couldn't. I don't have one close enough to me.
I've got several of them I could throw in the trash.
Yes. So they're just going to toss it. They're going to throw it out. So, okay, so how do we do it? The agents are the ones that we want to get to. How do we get in there? So here we go. There's 100,000 screenplays. Fortunately for the screenwriters, there are some paths to get that, to get all of those writers distilled down into, so that you're the drop that comes out the bottom of the distillery. That's a pretty good. Don't you think that's a good one, huh? I just made that up. I just came up with that. Okay, so we got to figure out. Fortunately for writers, it's the least expensive path to success, in my opinion, because it doesn't take money. It takes just the time. What's that, Fletch?
It's only you.
It's you. If you want to be a director, you gotta direct a movie. You gotta hire actors. You gotta find a team. You gotta get a camera. It's more expensive. Writing, there's just you. Okay, so there are ways to distill down that 100,000. So we're gonna go to the distillery, and by the time we get done, we're gonna have a nice glass of. I was trying to think of a really strong alcohol, vodka, right? Okay.
How purified water?
Purified water.
There you go.
Well, that doesn't
pure
quite.
as it gets, buddy.
I know, but water doesn't really get any distilled down to. Anyway, okay. So you have a couple of options. We talked about submitting your scripts cold. That's a bad idea. You can get referred in. Okay, so you have a buddy that's a writer, an established writer in the business. He could refer you to his agent. Okay, that's not a bad idea. Right. Relationships. Your uncle is Uncle Spielberg. Okay,
that's a good one, by the way. If anyone is actually the nephew to Uncle Spielberg, I would desperately like to take you to dinner.
Yes, so you have relationships, and Fletch is ready to take you to dinner. So so you've got relationships, you know, or you know, it may not, it's not, maybe not Uncle Spielberg, but it's, you know, someone that you know is working over at an agency or something like that. So there's that. There are festivals. So there are festivals that take on screenplays. There are websites that will read screenplays. Some of them charge money. I would be careful. I would, you know, if I'm going to a website to have them look at my screen, they're going to read it. See their ways of getting right in the business. Look and see who they are and what their pedigree. Do they really have connections? A lot of those would be big faults. So be careful. My favorite one are screenwriting contests.
Yeah.
When I was at DreamWorks and I was a lowly assistant, one of my jobs was to comb and watch all of the screenplay contests. And I would watch, and the number one contests, the number one screenplay winners, I would get in contact with them and try and set up a meeting for my boss to meet that young aspiring screenwriter that just won a contest. Now, why am I going to the contest? Because that contest has already distilled down probably 3,000 screenplays to one winner. Not one winter, but to one winner. So it's distilled down. So now I don't have to read 3,000 screenplays. I read one, or I read two, runner up, you know, first and second place. So I'll read two screenplays, and that guy's going to get a meeting with me over at a studio or an agency. So throughout all of these sort of pathways in, my favorite is contests, because if you're good, you'll win. If you're not, you'll lose, and you'll write more screenplays, and you'll get better, and then you'll eventually win if you keep trying. And so that will,
you know, I mean, they'll also give you the runner-ups on those, so you don't have to be like, well, I'll just look at the top one. You know, if you make the top 10, you probably stand a chance of getting seen by some people.
Absolutely. Well, because the number one guy is getting picked off by the majors.
That's right.
And the big agencies. You know, the four that I showed you earlier, but the 8th place or 7th place or 5th place is getting picked up by the mini major, getting paid attention by the mini majors and by the, you know, lower agents.
So what are the contests, in case they ask, what are the contests that are something that they should look at?
You know, there are a few out there, like the Nichols Fellowship screenwriting contest, which I haven't looked at in the last year or so to know that it's still around. I would assume it's still around because it's put on by the Academy. And so that is one that's done, you know, by the Oscars, so to speak. I think that's correct, the Nichols Fellowship. But there are other contests out there. Like the Sundance Institute has a screenwriting contest. I mean, you can do a search on the web for screenwriting contests and really kind of look who's associated with them, how big they are, how long they've been around, and you can kind of really tell. Okay, these are top ranking screenwriting contests. But that's the direction I would go if I was a writer. So finishing off the distillery. So 10 of these 100,000 make it to the agents. And then the agents, just like in our graphic before, are sending those writers out to the Jerry Bruckheimers of the world, the producers, because they have open writing assignments, and they're getting it to, Jerry Bruckheimer to, for his open writing assignment. Or, it may just be, hey, an agent calls Jerry Bruckheimer, says, hey, I just signed this new writer. He's amazing. You don't really have any open writing assignments, but I want you to just read a writing sample of his, because you're really going to like him. When you have an opening and a need for him, you're going to want him. So that agent will send your screenplay into Jerry Bruckheimer. Or you may have a script that you've written, a spec script. And when those spec scripts go out to the agents, just like I'd mentioned before, the Jim Hertzfeld new screenplay going out to town, your script could be going out to producers all around town. Excuse me. Now, every studio, as I mentioned before, has a bunch of producers that represent it. An agent will submit your spec screenplay to one of those producers that are represented at that studio.
And I think it's important to note here that the agents, and this is very kind of hush-hush conversations, but those agents know what those studios are looking for.
Yes.
So they're not going to take a script to a place where they're not looking for Westerns here over at Paramount right now, but I know that Disney's looking for one. So let's go over there. So they know what people are looking for.
They do. They know exactly what they're looking for. What kind of writer? That's why I was saying the writing sample. You've written a Western, and they've got a Western that they've already got a screenplay for it, so they're not interested in buying your Western. But if you have a good voice in the Western genre, your agent will send it over to that studio. And so the studios and in sort of the system, all of these, let me just find it back here. These are the content drivers, right? So this is the bank, if you remember. Every one of these studios has projects that they're working on, and every one of these studios has all of those producers around it. And so an agent will be submitting their screenplay to this studio, to that studio, to this, right? Through relationships that are had within the networks that we talked about earlier. So that's why it's important, those networks, if you're coming in as an assistant, that you get to know other assistants at different places, so that you have a connection at all the different studios. Back to our list here, back to our presentation here. So every producer will receive 8 or so screenplays, whether it's specs or writing assignments or writing samples. They'll send in, 1, 2, 3, 6 into the studio, and then the studio buys your idea or buys your hires you for the open writing assignment or what have you. The one thing that doesn't work, which we've already talked about, is the unsolicited. Everybody has a policy that they don't take unsolicited material. So you gotta get yourself into that system through one of these channels that really gets you on the inside. It's not going to be easy, but none of getting into this business. If you're looking for easy, Fletch, I think this is the business, right? If you're looking for an easy way in, this is the one.
It's this, or you can become a janitor. They're kind of comparative when it comes to difficulty in getting the job.
It's hard. It's hard to get in. So it's a fight to get in, and so you got to find the path to go in. The last piece of advice that I would really give to all those as they're trying to make their way into the business is, one is you got to be humble, man. you got to be humble and willing to just work at it. Be persistent, right? If
you eat a lot of garbage. I mean, when you first get started, you're going to be asked to, get me that donut, pull that chair over here. Can you run this to the printer? Can you run this over to Paramount? I mean, you're asked to do jobs that normally you would think, oh, this is beneath me. I don't need this. But in truth, they have a line a mile long of people who are willing to do this for free to get in.
Right.
So you got to be, I think, that humility and being easy to work with. When somebody says or asks you to do something, you need to say, okay, I can do that. I mean, unless it's against your moral code or something.
Yeah, don't break
up, your ground. But it's important to be able to be easy to work with.
Yeah, and work hard. When you finally get to bring that donut from the craft service to the office, get it there as fast as you can, right? And
oh yeah, don't dilly-dally.
Bring it with the right sprinkles on it, Don't bring a donut that has a bite out of it because you got hungry halfway through. Get there. Be persistent, It's a tough thing getting in. You want to be persistent, but not, you don't want to stalk these people. But be persistent, You place a phone call to the assistant, and then a week later you follow up, or a few days later you follow up, and then
another trait that I've noticed is handy, and I'm not very good at it, is being short and to the point. Because a lot of these people do not have the time to be able to sit and chit chat with you for the next 45 minutes. It needs to be quick, to the point. And there will be other times when you're out in a party or getting drinks or at a screening where you can chit chat with people. But when you're doing the job, you need to do the job and move on, and come back later, circle back, and foster that relationship in another way.
Yep, for sure. I mean, if you're looking at like the base level where we're all assistants, the other assistants don't have a ton of time because they're going crazy. But when you call them, you call them by name. It's just these little things. It's like, hey, Fletch, hey, I've got my boss for your boss, and they're like, oh man, he said my name, and that's it. Yeah. That's the interaction.
And I think that works. I think that works with everybody, whether you're on a crew. The first show I ever directed, my director of photography gave me a pen. He said, "Now we were directing about 14 different kids, young kids." And he said, as you meet them, write their names down on your hand, because you'll get this all day long, but you'll be able to direct them better if you call them by their name, and they will respond to you much better than, hey, kid, do this.
Right.
So learn people's names.
Absolutely.
Teachers are all good at this because you learn hundreds of kids' names every semester.
Yeah. So if you're a writer, write screenplays, write. If you're a director, direct. And if you're actor, you're acting, you just keep acting. And, if the directors is a very similar process, man. It's a little more expensive, but it's very similar. There are, contests, there's festivals, relationships. You can kind of go through the same process to kind of break into the business, but you just got to do it, and you got to be good at it.
I think, Chad, I gotta say, I think it's like once you've made a movie and it is actually good, I think it's a lot easier than a writer breaking in. If you've made a movie that's good, I mean, that's really good, it will get passed around. So someone will say, "Oh, this is great," and they'll pass it around to somebody else, and a week will go by or a month, and then suddenly somebody at the studio gets their hands on it from a link that somebody put on Vimeo, and before you know it, somebody from the big world is calling you going, "Hey, I just saw your little film. That was really good."
Yes.
Whereas and the script is a little different.
It's harder.
You still have to read. You have to interpret. You have to pour through the pages, and then it's hard to share that with somebody over at another studio, and then they have to sit down and read it, and it takes time.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. It's more expensive, but it's more viral.
Yeah.
Meaning it's easy for somebody to just watch a link for 5 minutes and go, "Oh my gosh, that was great," versus reading a screenplay for an hour and a half. 2 hours. So yeah, it's a little more expensive, but it can be easier to sort of get a visual and be seen. Well, that's.
I got one more thing since we have a little time. We have 10 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
I want to hear your story about how you broke into the studio system.
All right, I'll have to distill it down because it's
right. Don't give me soup to nuts. Just give me a couple of the crackers.
A couple of the highlights. Well,
first
of all, so I think what's most important in my story is I had a goal and I knew where I wanted to go, right? So I wanted to be at Amblin, at DreamWorks, which was in the Amblin facility in feature development. So I knew that's where I wanted to be. And so I was doing everything, trying to figure out every way to get to the bottom level job in that position, in that company. And so before I jump into it, the one thing I would say is that if you want to be a producer, don't take a job at Disney in the business affairs department, right? That's probably the bottom, it's not a bad place to start, but you got to jump over ladders to get to feature development or in producing.
Well, I think a good example of this, what you're talking about, is when you were working at DreamWorks and you weren't in the department that you wanted to be. And I remember getting a call from you and you were like, dude, they just offered me a job for a lot of money over at DreamWorks Music.
Yep.
And do I take it? And I'm like, well, do you want to be a producer of music? And he said, no. I said, well, I think you have your answer.
Yeah. And I had a few of those in those early days of like trying to find a job. It was, I got a job offer over at Disney in business affairs that I turned down. DreamWorks Music. I got a job offer in DreamWorks Marketing, and I turned those down. But the short and sweet of my job was as I figured out where I wanted to be, which was Amblin, DreamWorks. I did everything possible to get some informational interviews. I ended up getting into human resources over at DreamWorks. Yet they didn't really. They thought I was, I was young. Nobody's going to hire me. So that was kind of a bust. And so I figured out where were they hiring their temps? So you have assistants, and then you have mailroom, and then even below that you have temps, and then you have the dog kennel, and it's pretty at the bottom. But I figured out what was the temp agency that DreamWorks was using to hire. I went over to the temp agency and tried to get a job there, and I wasn't qualified. I mean, imagine that. I didn't know Excel. I didn't know, Microsoft Word well enough. I took all these tests and I failed them miserably. So I wasn't even qualified to be a temp. So
they do have dog walkers now. I mean, maybe that's
I know.
More your speed.
So I went back to the human resources person who wasn't really excited to talk to me, and I was being persistent, maybe a little too persistent in following up. And I said to her, I will never call you again if you will give me a recommendation over at London Temps. And because London Temps was the company that was putting jobs into DreamWorks. And she said, absolutely. Now, I had just been to London. I had just been to London Temps and failed all their tests, by the way. And so this head of human resources calls over to London Temps and says, hey, I want you to take a look at a guy. I'd like you to take a look at a guy, Chet Thomas. And I'm sure they're thinking, oh, we've seen him. But because the head of human resources was calling, they were like, absolutely, because she's the one that hires. And their assumption was, oh, DreamWorks head of human resources likes this guy named Chet Thomas, so we're going to bring him in, which they did. They trained me on all these programs and got me qualified. then started sending me out to jobs and started sending me to the DreamWorks jobs because they thought that the DreamWorks jobs were the ones that they wanted me for. And long story short, after being in that pool for like 3 months, I get called to do a job. Well, there were 2 jobs available. There was one that was a possibility over at Amblin for 1 day. And I'm like, that's the one. Send me to that one. Sign me up. And they're like, well, relax. It's not for sure yet. And there's one other job. It's like a 5-day job over in the Texaco building, which was not Amblin. It wasn't It was DreamWorks. But it was corporate. It was something other than feature development. So I said, I don't really want that one. And they're like, Chet, it's 5 days and it's for sure. And I'm like, I'd rather have the 1 day that's not for sure. And they're like, it makes no sense. So like they hung up and they're like, I don't get this guy, but whatever. But like an hour later, they call me back and they say, Chet, you have to take the 5-day job. And I'm like, but I don't want the 5-day job. And they're like, it's 5 days. The other one's maybe 1. And I'm like, you guys can keep my check. I don't care. And they're like, are you crazy? And I'm like, that's just what I want. And then they just said, no, you have to take this job. So I was like, okay. So I took the job. Guess where it was? It was over in the Texaco building, working in the office of the head of human resources. They had me back in this little office. The head wasn't in yet. And I was like, okay, I know she comes in at 10. I'm going to go fake file out right by the opening area. Fake file. So I was fake filing out by where I knew she would come in. And she walks in and she sees me and she goes, like she looks at me like she's seen a ghost and looks at me and she goes, what are you doing here? And I was like, you guys brought me in for a temp job. She's like, oh, okay. And then she went into her office. And then
what are you doing here?
And then I left my fake filing job to go back to the real filing job. And then I was just working. And like an hour later, she came into my office and sat down on the desk and she said, Chet, where do you want to be at DreamWorks? And I said, Amblin. And she goes, okay, let me go look around. She goes out, comes back like 20 minutes later, and she says, okay, there's a job over at Amblin, but it's an indefinite temp job. And I said, sign me up. I'm in. And that's where it started.
Yeah.
That is my story. I boiled it down in an hour-long story.
Yeah, you took all the juicy tidbits. That was good.
Yeah, so anyway. Well, folks.
Well, no one's asked any questions, so you must have covered everything really well.
I covered it all, man. That is my story. I'm just looking at the chat here. Oh, somebody said, so this is how you sneak on the lot. Yeah, that's exactly how you do sneak on the lot.
Exactly how it's done. Well, that's what Steven did, right? That's why we call ourselves Sneak on the Lot.
Yeah, and I did sneak back on the lot a couple times, so we won't talk about that. So.
All right, so I think that wraps it up since there's no questions for tonight. So this will be on the site very shortly, in probably the next hour. We'll get this up, and you can use it in your classrooms tomorrow. Thanks for coming, guys. We'll see you later.